We will handle this at home. My father hissed those words while I lay bleeding on a hospital bed. He thought a liability waiver and the threat of financial ruin would force my silence just as it always had. But the emergency room doctor took one look at my fresh x-rays and made a single phone call that brought my family's pristine image crashing down. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family. My name is Kira. I am 33 years old, and my entire life changed at the bottom of a marble staircase. The grand foyer of the elite Chicago Country Club was supposed to be a place of celebration. Instead, it became the site of my ultimate betrayal. The sound of my collarbone snapping echoed through the grand hall. I lay crumpled at the base of the sweeping marble steps, gasping for air as sharp pain radiated through my right arm. But as I forced my eyes open, I saw her. My 30-year-old sister Chelsea stood at the top of the landing. She was not panicking. She was not screaming for help. She simply reached down, adjusted the hem of her silk dress, and looked down at me with a cold, victorious smirk. For a brief moment, our eyes locked. She knew exactly what she had just done. She had planted both hands firmly on my back and shoved me with every ounce of her strength. Then the performance began. As the heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open, revealing the crowd of wealthy guests, Chelsea let out a theatrical scream. She collapsed onto her knees, her shoulders shaking with manufactured sobs. My parents rushed out in a panic. I tried to speak, tried to call out to them through the searing pain in my chest, but no words came. I watched paralyzed by agony as my parents ran down the staircase. But they did not stop beside me. They completely bypassed my broken body to rush to Chelsea. My mother wrapped her arms around her weeping golden child, while my father glared down at me as if my broken body was simply an inconvenience ruining their evening. The emergency room was a chaotic blur of flashing lights and beeping monitors. Yet I could only focus on my father hovering over my hospital bed. Donovan did not ask about my pain levels. He did not ask what the paramedics had said. Instead, he aggressively shoved a thick wooden clipboard an inch from my face. "Sign this right now, Kira." His voice was a harsh whisper designed to carry only to my ears. "You tripped on your own heels. You lost your balance. That is what happened. Do you understand me?" My right arm throbbed intensely and my collarbone felt like shattered glass. Yet here was my father demanding I sign a waiver absolving my sister of any wrongdoing. Through his hissed threats, the lifelong reality of our family was laid bare. Chelsea was the pampered darling, the fragile princess who could do no wrong in their eyes. She was the perfect daughter meant to maintain their high society standing in Chicago. I was the designated scapegoat. My role had always been to absorb the blame, cover up the messes, and quietly fade into the background so Chelsea could shine. Every time she caused a disaster, I was expected to take the punishment without a single word. When I did not immediately reach for the pen, Donovan leaned in closer, his face turning an angry shade of red. "Do not even think about embarrassing this family today," he growled. "Chelsea has her charity gala next week, and we cannot have a scandal attached to her name right now. If you tell the police anything other than the fact that you are clumsy, I will cut you off entirely." He pointed a thick finger at my face. "I will remove you from the family health insurance tonight. I will freeze the emergency fund. You will drown in six-figure medical debt by tomorrow morning. You will lose everything." Barbara stood just behind him, her arms crossed tightly, nodding in agreement. She looked at me not with a mother's concern, but with cold calculation. "Listen to your father. Do not make this harder than it has to be. You have always been so careless and awkward. Sign the paper and we can all go home and put this ugly mess behind us." I lay there, gritting my teeth as another wave of sheer agony washed over my upper body. I looked at the two people who were supposed to protect me, realizing they were actively participating in my destruction, just to shield the daughter who had intentionally pushed me down a flight of stairs. They truly believed I was completely dependent on their wealth and approval. Despite the blinding pain, a deep, silent resolve settled over me. I pressed my lips together tightly and remained dead silent. I did not reach for the pen. I simply stared back at them, refusing to give them the submissive compliance they demanded. Donovan slammed his heavy hand against the metal bedrail, his patience vanishing completely. I am not playing games with you, Kira. You will sign this waiver right now, or you will find yourself out on the street with absolutely nothing to your name. Before he could force the pen into my hand, the heavy double doors of the trauma bay swung open with a forceful push. The sudden noise made my parents jump back in surprise. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped into the room. His name tag identified him as Dr. Aris, the attending trauma physician. His face was entirely devoid of the polite, comforting warmth usually reserved for families of injured patients. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and fixed directly on my father. Dr. Aris did not introduce himself. He did not ask how everyone was doing. He walked straight past. Barbara looked directly at Donovan and pointed a firm, uncompromising finger toward the hallway door. "Step away from the patient," he ordered, his voice carrying a heavy authority that brooked no argument whatsoever. "Step back right now." Donovan blinked, clearly unaccustomed to being spoken to in such a disrespectful manner. "Excuse me, I am her father. We are having a private family conversation here." "Not anymore," Dr. Aris replied coldly. He walked over to the illuminated light board mounted on the wall and snapped a series of large, high-contrast X-ray films into the clips. The stark black and white images of my shattered bones lit up the dim hospital room, exposing the brutal, undeniable truth of what my sister had done. My father crossed his arms defensively, trying to regain his dominant posture. She tripped on her heels and fell down the stairs. "It is unfortunate, but we are handling it internally." Dr. Aris turned away from the light board and faced my parents, his expression hardening into absolute stone. "We need to have a very serious conversation about the physics of these injuries," he stated flatly, tapping the glowing film with his pen. "Because the trauma displayed on these scans does not happen from a simple trip and fall. We are dealing with something entirely different here, and the solid evidence is written right into her bones." Dr. Aris stepped to the glowing panel. The room went still as his finger traced a twisting line down my radius. He looked at my father with a gaze so piercing it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. "A simple trip on a staircase results in specific, predictable patterns of injury." His voice echoed against the sterile walls. "When someone loses their balance, their instinct is to put their hands out to break the fall. We see transverse fractures. We see impact trauma on the palms and wrists. What we do not see under any normal circumstances is a severe spiral fracture twisting down the forearm, combined with a concussive shatter point directly on the clavicle." Donovan shifted his weight. His expensive leather shoes squeaked against the floor. He crossed his arms tighter, trying to project the intimidating presence he used to bully employees. "Kira has always been exceptionally uncoordinated." He scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "She probably twisted around trying to grab the railing and got her arm tangled. It was a tragic accident, doctor, and we are handling her care personally. We simply need her to sign the release paperwork so we can transfer her to a private facility." Dr. Aris did not blink. He turned back to the light board and tapped the image of my shattered collarbone. "Bones do not lie, Donovan," he replied, dropping any pretense of polite bedside manner. "To generate the sheer torque required to snap a radius in this specific spiral pattern, while simultaneously sustaining blunt force trauma to the upper back and clavicle, the patient would have to be propelled forward by a sudden external force." He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto my parents. "The physics of this trauma require a high-velocity, deliberate two-handed shove directly between the shoulder blades." My mother stepped forward. Barbara smoothed her designer blouse, pasting on the sweet smile she used whenever she needed to manipulate a situation. "Dr. Aris, you must understand Kira is practically a walking disaster," she said, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. "Ever since she was a little girl, she has been tripping over her own feet. We love her dearly, but she is clumsy. She falls down all the time. It is a sad reality of her life. There is no need to invent dramatic stories about shoving." Dr. Aris looked at her for a long moment. He reached toward the computer terminal next to the light board and clicked a few keys. A second set of X-rays appeared on the large screen, these focusing on my left shoulder and upper back. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach as I recognized the exact area he was displaying. If you are referring to a history of falling, Dr. Aris said, his tone dangerously calm, then I suppose we should discuss this secondary shadow right here. He pointed to a thick, misshapen lump of white on the scan, situated near my left scapula. This is a severely calcified, improperly healed fracture. Based on the bone density and the surrounding tissue scarring, this injury occurred approximately 15 to 20 years ago. It was a massive break that was never set cast and never treated by a medical professional. The silence in the trauma bay became suffocating. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding against my bruised ribs. The memories I had buried for 2 decades came rushing back with violent clarity. I was 15 years old again, standing on the edge of the elevated wooden porch at our old summer house. Chelsea had been furious that day because I had received a higher grade on a math exam, pulling attention from her upcoming cheerleading tryouts. She had stormed out onto the porch, screaming that I was ruining her life, and before I could turn around, she had planted both hands on my back and shoved me off the 6-foot drop. I remembered the agonizing crunch of my shoulder hitting the hard earth below. I remembered lying in the dirt, crying out for my parents, begging them to take me to the hospital. But Donovan and Barbara merely rushed outside, grabbed my uninjured arm, and dragged me inside. They locked the doors and closed the blinds. Barbara hissed at me to stop screaming, warning that if we went to the emergency room, the police might ask questions, and a scandal would ruin Chelsea's chances of making the varsity cheer squad. They wrapped my shoulder in tight bandages, locked me in my bedroom, and told me to take pain pills until it stopped hurting. My shoulder healed wrong, leaving a permanent ache whenever it rained. They buried the abuse to protect their golden child. And now Dr. Aris was dragging their darkest secret out into the harsh fluorescent light. This old fracture is not the result of a clumsy child. Dr. Aris continued, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. This is an example of hidden physical trauma. It is the signature of a severe injury that was deliberately concealed from medical authorities. When you combine this improperly healed, neglected bone with the fresh, violent spiral fracture we are looking at today, a clear, very disturbing pattern emerges. My father's face drained of color, his aggressive posture crumbling into genuine panic. He took a step toward the doctor, lowering his voice in a desperate attempt to regain control. Look here. Doctor, there is a substantial amount of money we can donate to this hospital. He pulled a leather checkbook from his inner jacket pocket. My company is highly philanthropic. We can make a generous contribution to your department today. Let us discharge Kira to our private care right now, and we can consider this matter closed. Dr. Aris looked at the checkbook, then slowly raised his eyes to meet my father's desperate gaze. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. He simply delivered his next words with the weight of a falling anvil. I am a mandated reporter, he stated flatly. Donovan froze, the checkbook hovering uselessly in his hand. Barbara let out a small, terrified gasp, taking a step backward until she hit the edge of the stainless steel supply cart. The illusion of control they had maintained for my entire life was shattering right in front of them. In the state of Illinois, Dr. Aris continued maintaining eye contact with my father. Medical professionals are legally obligated to report any injuries that exhibit the clear hallmarks of deliberate assault and historical abuse. I do not care about your checkbook. I do not care about your social standing at whatever country club you came from tonight. My only concern is the patient lying in this bed who has clearly suffered a lifetime of unrecorded violence. My father opened his mouth to argue, to deploy another empty threat, to spin another lie, but the words died in his throat. Dr. Aris reached into the deep pocket of his white medical coat and pulled out a black pager. He held it up so both my parents could see the bright red light blinking steadily on its small screen. I pressed the silent alarm the moment I reviewed these scans. Dr. Aris said, his voice dropping to a commanding register that left no room for debate. I have already called the police. They are waiting right outside that door. The heavy door to the trauma bay pushed open before my father could formulate a response. Two uniformed Chicago police officers stepped into the room, the static crackle of their radios cutting through the tense silence. They looked from Dr. Aris to my parents and then finally to me lying broken on the hospital bed. Donovan did not miss a beat. The transformation was so fast it was almost terrifying. The red-faced tyrant who had just been threatening me vanished. In his place stood a deeply distressed father, his shoulders slumped, his voice thick with manufactured worry. He stepped directly into the path of the officers, extending a steady hand to the taller of the two. "Officers." "Thank goodness you are here," Donovan said, his tone perfectly calibrated to sound exhausted but cooperative. "I am Donovan. This is my wife, Barbara. Our daughter Kira had a terrible accident at the country club this evening. We are all just completely shaken." The taller officer introduced himself as Officer Miller. He held a small notepad and clicked his pen. "We received a call from the attending physician regarding the nature of the injuries, Mr. Donovan. He stated that the trauma does not match a typical fall. We need to ask a few questions to establish exactly what happened on that staircase." My father let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples as if burdened by a great sorrow. "I understand completely, officer. Medical professionals have to be cautious, but the truth is much less dramatic than whatever the doctor is implying. Kira was wearing incredibly high heels tonight. She has always struggled with her coordination even as a child. She simply lost her balance at the top of the marble landing. She reached out, tried to twist around to grab the handrail, and tumbled backward down the steps. It was horrifying to watch. Her sister Chelsea tried to grab her, but she was just too far away. We are all devastated." I lay on the narrow hospital bed listening to him spin this elaborate fiction with absolute flawless precision. The pain radiating from my shattered collarbone and the spiral fracture in my arm was blinding, but the betrayal stung far worse. He was looking a police officer right in the eye and casually writing off my agony as a byproduct of my own supposed incompetence. Officer Miller listened patiently, jotting down notes before stepping around my father to approach my bed. He looked down at me, his expression softening. "Miss, can you verify this account? Do you remember what caused you to fall down the stairs tonight?" Barbara stepped up beside the bed, immediately resting a warning hand on my knee. Her grip was tight, her nails digging slightly through the thin fabric of the hospital blanket. "She is in so much pain, officer," Barbara murmured, her eyes pleading with him. "They have her on heavy medication. I do not think she is in any condition to give a statement right now. She is so confused." I looked at the officer. I looked at my mother's warning glare. I looked at my father, who was watching me with breath held tight, waiting for me to play my designated role and absolve my sister. A powerful urge to scream the truth clawed at my throat, but I forced it down. If I screamed now, they would call me hysterical. They would blame the trauma and the painkillers. I needed to see exactly how far Donovan and Barbara were willing to go. I needed them to lay all their cards on the table. So I played weak. I let my eyes flutter shut, letting out a shallow, ragged breath. "Everything hurts," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I am so tired. I do not want to talk right now." My father let out a slow, silent breath of relief. I could feel the tension leave his posture. He thought he had won. He thought the obedient scapegoat had submitted once again. Officer Miller nodded sympathetically, closing his notepad. "I understand, miss. We will let you rest. We still need to interview the paramedics who transported you and speak with the country club staff to see if anyone else witnessed the fall. We will be right outside in the hallway if you remember anything else." Dr. Aris shot my father a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. He did not say another word to my parents. He simply turned and followed the two police officers out of the trauma bay. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, sealing us inside the room, the atmosphere shifted. The concerned parents vanished. Donovan turned to me, his face twisting back into a mask of absolute fury. His polished veneer stripped away, revealing the ruthless businessman underneath. "What exactly are you trying to pull, Kira?" Donovan demanded, his voice a harsh, dangerous rasp. "Why did you not immediately tell them you tripped? Playing the silent victim, acting like you are too confused to answer. Do you have any idea what is at stake here?" Chelsea is sitting in the waiting room crying her eyes out because she is terrified the police are going to drag her away. Barbara stepped closer to the bed, her face pale with anger. You are being incredibly selfish, Kira. Your sister has her entire life ahead of her. She is marrying into one of the most prominent families in the state next year. You cannot ruin this for her over a stupid accident. You will ruin this family's reputation. It was not an accident, Mother, I said softly, my voice steady despite the searing pain in my chest. She shoved me. You know she shoved me. Donovan slammed his hand against the foot of the bed. It does not matter what happened, he barked, leaning over me until I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. What matters is what the police believe, and right now you are leaving the door open for an investigation. I am telling you one last time. When those officers come back into this room, you will look them in the eye and tell them you tripped. I stared back at him completely devoid of the fear he expected to see. No, I replied simply. I will not lie for her anymore. Donovan straightened up, his eyes narrowing into cold, dark slits. The father I knew was completely gone, replaced by an adversary calculating how to destroy an opponent. He believed he held all the power. He believed I was the same terrified, dependent girl I had been when I was 15 years old. He decided words were no longer enough. He needed to use his ultimate weapon. Fine, Donovan said, his voice dropping to an icy, terrifying calm. You want to play hardball. Let us play hardball. Right there in the middle of the trauma bay, he pulled his sleek smartphone from his pocket. He did not try to hide what he was doing. He wanted me to hear every single word. He swiped across the screen and dialed a number, placing the phone on speaker so the dial tone echoed in the sterile room. A professional male voice answered on the second ring. Good evening, Mr. Donovan. How can I assist you at this hour? Marcus, I need you to execute an immediate freeze on the secondary family trust account. Donovan ordered, his eyes locked on mine. Yes, the emergency fund. I want all access suspended effective immediately. Furthermore, I need you to contact the insurance broker first thing tomorrow morning. I am dropping Kira from the family healthcare policy. I want her coverage terminated retroactively to noon today. There was a slight hesitation on the other end of the line. Sir, retroactively terminating health coverage while a family member is presumably seeking care could result in significant out-of-pocket liabilities. That is exactly the point, Marcus Donovan replied coldly. Terminate it. He tapped the screen to end the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He crossed his arms, looking down at me with a satisfied, malicious smirk. He had just dropped what he believed was a financial guillotine squarely on my neck. Do you understand what just happened, Kira? He asked, his voice dripping with condescension. You are sitting in an expensive trauma bay with a shattered collarbone and a spiral fracture. You are going to need surgery. You are going to need physical therapy. Without the family insurance policy, and without access to the emergency fund, you are going to be drowning in six-figure medical debt by the time the sun comes up. He leaned in closer, bringing his face inches from mine. You do not make enough money at your little data entry job to cover a single night in this hospital. You will be bankrupt before you even get a cast put on that arm. You will lose your car. You will lose your credit. You will be completely ruined. Barbara moved to stand shoulder to shoulder with my father, shaking her head with a look of profound disappointment. And do not think you can come crying to us when the bills start arriving, Kira, she added, twisting the knife deeper. We pay the lease on your apartment. We supplement your income because we feel sorry for you. If you choose to go to the police and try to send your sister to jail, we will pull every cent of our financial support. You will be homeless. You will have absolutely nothing and no one to blame but yourself. They stood there, a united front of toxic power, waiting for the inevitable surrender. They expected the tears to start flowing. They expected the panic to set in. They expected me to beg for their mercy and promise to tell the police whatever they wanted to hear. But I did not cry. I did not beg. A deep, dangerous calm washed over me, settling into my bones and cooling the burning pain in my shoulder. I looked at the two people who had spent my entire life underestimating me, treating me like a disposable asset. Slowly moving with deliberate care, I reached my good uncast left hand toward the small plastic belongings bag the nurses had placed on the bedside table. I pushed aside my torn, bloody silk blouse and pulled out my personal cell phone. I held it in my hand, the screen glowing brightly in the dim hospital room, and I looked back at my parents. The terrified, obedient scapegoat was dead. Only Kira remained, and I was ready to burn their empire to the ground. My left hand was steady as I tapped the screen of my phone. I navigated to my contacts, ignoring the sharp sting of pain radiating through my chest. Donovan let out a short, mocking laugh. He thought I was calling a friend to beg for a place to crash. Barbara leaned against the wall, ready to watch me crumble. I pressed the call button and tapped the speaker icon, letting the ringing echo clearly through the quiet trauma room. 1 ring, 2 rings. But on the 3rd ring, the line clicked open. A crisp, professional voice filled the room. "Good evening, Kira. This is David from Vanguard Wealth Management. We received the automated alert from your medical proxy. Are you safe, and how are you feeling?" My father froze. His hand dropped back to his side. Barbara blinked, trying to process the words. Vanguard Wealth Management. That was an institution requiring a minimum of 7 figures just to open a checking account. I kept my eyes locked directly on my father as I spoke. "I am safe, David, but I am currently in the trauma ward. I sustained a spiral fracture to my right radius and a severely broken collarbone. I will need orthopedic surgery in the morning." Understood, Kira. Do you need me to contact the hospital billing department directly to activate your corporate platinum coverage? We can have the executive liaison from your national health network fast-track the authorizations so you do not have to worry about paperwork. I smiled, a small cold movement of my lips. That would be wonderful, David. Please bypass the standard billing desk and coordinate directly with my private policy. I am covered under the executive tier, entirely separate from any external family plans. Donovan took a slow, heavy step back toward the hospital bed. His face was rapidly turning an ashen shade of pale. "What kind of trick is this?" he demanded, his voice devoid of its earlier booming confidence. "What national health network? What corporate coverage? You do data entry for a logistics firm. You are on my insurance plan." I ignored him completely. "David, my father is under the impression that he can retroactively cancel my health insurance to force me into medical debt. Could you please clarify my employment status and insurance standing for him?" "Certainly," David replied. "Sir, your daughter has not required your insurance or financial assistance for exactly 10 years. She is the Director of Medical Coding and Fraud Investigation for the largest health network in the Midwest. She earns a base salary in the mid-6 figures, supplemented by substantial annual bonuses and an executive benefits package. The policy she uses covers 100% of all trauma and surgical interventions at premium facilities. You have absolutely zero leverage over her health care." Donovan stared at me as if I had suddenly morphed into an entirely different species. He looked at the phone, then back at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Barbara brought a trembling hand to her mouth. "Director," she whispered, stumbling over the word. "But we saw your apartment. We saw your beat-up car. You always wore those cheap clothes to family dinners." "It is called maintaining a boundary, Mother," I replied, my voice steady. "I drove a 10-year-old sedan to your house because if I showed up in the car I actually own, you would have demanded I trade it in to buy Chelsea a new convertible. I let you believe I was a struggling subordinate because the moment you realized I had money, you would have tried to drain me dry. And I was never going to fund the golden child lifestyle." Donovan swallowed hard. The arrogant patriarch who had just threatened to throw me onto the street was rapidly shrinking. "This is a bluff," he stammered. "You are lying. Even if you have some fancy job, you are still legally tied to the family emergency fund. I froze that account. You do not have access to liquid cash. You are cut off." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. "David," I said, speaking clearly into the phone, "could you please handle the secondary family account my father just mentioned? Sever my name from the routing numbers immediately. I want no legal or financial ties to Donovan or Barbara moving forward. Consider it done, Kira. David replied smoothly. The paperwork will be filed electronically within the hour. However, I should note for the record that removing your name from that specific account is a pure formality. The account is entirely inconsequential to your overall financial portfolio. My father's eyes darted wildly. What does he mean, inconsequential? He demanded. I put money in that account. We built that safety net for years. You cannot just walk away from it. I locked eyes with him, letting the cold precision of a fraud investigator bleed into my expression. You did not build anything, Dad. I told him. You demanded I deposit 20% of my paycheck into that joint account every month since I was 18 years old to prove my loyalty. You told me it was a safety net, but I saw the bank statements. I know you were secretly siphoning money out of it to pay for Chelsea's country club dues and her luxury vacations. You were using my hard-earned money to fund her pampered life. Donovan's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He opened his mouth to deny it, but I cut him off. So 5 years ago, I stopped paying into it. I redirected my deposits to a private account you do not even know exists. I left exactly $200 in that precious family emergency fund just to keep the account open and avoid arousing your suspicion. That is the account you just theatrically froze, Dad. You proudly cut off my access to $200. Congratulations on your brilliant financial maneuvering. The absolute humiliation washing over my father's face was a masterpiece. He had played his ultimate trump card, believing he held the power of life and death over my future, only to discover a fistful of nothing. All the patriarchal dominance he had relied on for 3 decades evaporated into the sterile hospital air. He had just realized that his designated victim was vastly wealthier and significantly smarter than he could have ever imagined. I did not deceive anyone, I replied, staring them down. You saw exactly what you wanted to see. You needed me to be a failure so Chelsea could look like a success. You needed a punching bag and I just stopped bleeding for you. David, I said, bringing the phone closer. Please initiate the asset protection protocols we discussed. Lock down all my properties and ensure the hospital security desk has my parents flagged as restricted individuals. They are not to have any access to my medical information or my room moving forward. Understood, Kira, David replied. Security will be notified immediately. I will speak with you in the morning after your surgery. The line clicked dead. I placed the phone back on my lap and stared at the 2 people standing beside my bed. Donovan's hands balled into tight, shaking fists at his sides. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched collar as his face turned a dangerous, vibrant shade of purple. The realization of his total impotence was transforming into raw, unadulterated rage. He took a heavy, aggressive step forward, his chest heaving, preparing to launch into a screaming tirade that would likely get him arrested. He opened his mouth, a furious roar building in his throat. Before a single sound could escape his lips, my cell phone violently buzzed against my leg. A sharp, shrill notification chime pierced the heavy tension in the room. I glanced down at the bright screen. It was not a text message. It was a social media alert. Chelsea had just gone live. I tapped the notification with my left index finger, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my fractured ribs. The screen flickered, expanding to fill my display with a high-definition live stream. Chelsea was sitting in the center of her massive custom-designed bedroom. The pale pink silk headboard framed her like a soft halo, offset by the imported crystal chandelier, casting a warm, sympathetic glow across the room. She was wearing an oversized, cozy knit sweater, a stark contrast to the sleek designer cocktail dress she had been wearing just hours ago when she violently shoved me to the marble floor. Her makeup was perfectly smudged, giving her the appearance of someone who had been weeping uncontrollably, yet still looked effortlessly beautiful. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them in a practiced pose of absolute vulnerability. A single perfectly timed tear tracked down her cheek as she stared directly into the camera lens. I took a shaky breath, pressing the volume button up so her voice echoed off the sterile walls of the trauma bay. My father and mother froze their eyes, darting to the glowing screen in my hand. Chelsea let out a ragged, trembling sigh, pressing the heel of her palm to her eye. I did not want to make this public. Chelsea whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. I always believed family issues should remain private, but I am terrified, and I need to share the truth before the malicious rumors start. She paused, looking down at her manicured hands, her lower lip quivering precisely on cue. Tonight at the country club gala, my older sister Kira suffered a severe psychotic breakdown. The sheer audacity of the lie stole the breath from my lungs. Chelsea looked back at the camera, her eyes wide and fearful. She has always struggled with jealousy and deep-seated emotional instability, but tonight she completely snapped. Out of nowhere, she cornered me near the grand staircase. She was screaming, saying horrible, violent things to me, and then she attacked me. Chelsea let out a loud, dramatic sob, burying her face in her hands for a moment, before looking back up, her eyes wide with fake terror. I tried to calm her down. I tried to back away, but she lunged at me. In her blind rage, she lost her footing and tumbled backward down the marble stairs. It was the most horrific thing I have ever witnessed. I tried to catch her, I really did, but she was just so out of control. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. She was not just covering her tracks. She was painting me as a deranged, violent aggressor, completely rewriting the narrative before the police could even finish their preliminary paperwork. But Chelsea was not finished. She sniffled, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her oversized sweater, clutching a crumpled tissue in her hand. The doctors are looking after her now, but the sheer trauma of being violently attacked by my own flesh and blood has left me completely shattered. She whimpered. I cannot sleep. I cannot stop shaking. My therapist told me I am going to need intensive specialized trauma care to process this unprovoked violence. The kind of exclusive inpatient therapy that insurance simply will not cover. A bright blue link pinned itself to the top of the live chat window on the screen. She had already uploaded a thumbnail image of herself looking devastated, complete with a somber filter. I have set up a GoFundMe. Chelsea, said, her voice dropping to a fragile, pleading whisper. I hate asking for help, but the cost of the severe trauma therapy I need is overwhelming. The goal is $50,000. Anything you can spare to help me feel safe again would mean the world to me. Please just keep me in your prayers. I watched the counter on the screen. In the span of 30 seconds, the donations began rolling in. $500 from a local socialite, $1,000 from one of Donovan's business partners. Chelsea was actively monetizing her own felony assault. The live stream ended, the screen fading to black. Almost instantly, my phone began to vibrate violently in my palm. The rapid, relentless buzzing sent sharp jolts of pain up my broken arm, but I could not look away from the screen. Text messages flooded my notification center, stacking up faster than I could read them. It was a torrential downpour of digital hatred mobilized by my sister's flawless performance. An alert from my Aunt Susan popped up first, reading that she always knew there was something deeply wrong with me and that I belonged in a psychiatric ward. She demanded I never contact the family again. A message from my cousin Mark followed a second later, calling me a monster for attacking Chelsea out of pure jealousy and stating he hoped I would rot in a cell. Then came the messages from our mutual acquaintances, people I had known for over a decade. A text from my former college roommate, someone Chelsea had actively poisoned against me years ago, lit up the screen declaring she always knew I was toxic, but this was a new low. They called me unhinged, unstable, and dangerous. They demanded I issue a public apology to Chelsea immediately. They told me I deserved every broken bone in my body. The sheer volume of the vitriol was suffocating. I had spent my entire life shielding Chelsea, absorbing the blame for her mistakes, and within 5 minutes she had weaponized my silence and turned my entire world against me. I slowly looked up from my phone. Barbara had crossed the room and was peering over my shoulder, reading the notifications as they rapidly populated on my screen. A slow, deeply cruel smile spread across her face. The panic that had gripped her just moments ago when David from Vanguard froze the family accounts had completely vanished. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, radiating a triumphant, vindictive energy. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my glowing screen. Look at that, Kira, Barbara said, her voice dripping with pure satisfaction. Look at what happens when you try to cross us. Did you really think you could outsmart this family just because you hid some money in a secret bank account? Did you honestly believe a single person in this city would ever take your word over Chelsea's? Barbara leaned down, resting her hands on the cold metal rail of my hospital bed, bringing her face uncomfortably close to mine. Chelsea is beloved. She is perfect. You are the difficult, stubborn daughter who never fit in anywhere. Everyone watching that video already believed you were bitter and jealous. Chelsea just gave them the exact confirmation they were waiting for. She let out a dry, mocking laugh, gesturing toward the phone still buzzing relentlessly in my lap. Your reputation is effectively dead, Kira. No matter what you tell the police now, you will look like a deranged, vindictive liar desperately trying to cover up your own psychotic breakdown. The police will see that video. The district attorney will see the donations pouring in from the most powerful people in Chicago. You are completely ruined. You will have no friends, no family, and absolutely no credibility left in this city by sunrise. Donovan walked over to stand beside his wife, a smug, arrogant grin returning to his face. The fear of my financial independence had been entirely eclipsed by the sheer brilliance of Chelsea's social sabotage. He adjusted his suit jacket, looking down at me with ultimate disdain. "Your mother is absolutely right," Donovan said, crossing his arms over his chest. "You can keep your platinum health insurance and your little corporate job. It will not matter when the entire city believes you are violently unstable. Now you are going to lay back in that bed, keep your mouth shut, and accept your punishment like you always do." I stared at the two of them, the heavy realization settling over me that there was no bottom to their depravity. They were willing to watch me be branded a violent psychotic just to ensure Chelsea's upcoming charity gala went smoothly. They truly believed they had backed me into an inescapable corner, trapping me in a prison of public opinion. I opened my mouth to respond, but the heavy, solid oak doors of the trauma bay suddenly swung open with a resounding thud. It was not Dr. Aris returning with the police officers. It was not a nurse coming to check my vitals. A man stepped into the stark fluorescent light of the hospital room. His dark polished dress shoes clicked sharply against the linoleum. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal gray bespoke suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his presence commanding an immediate suffocating silence. It was Vincent, the chief executive officer of the National Health Network and my direct boss. He did not look panicked. He looked furious. And he had not come alone. Walking immediately behind him, carrying a sleek black leather briefcase, was a man I recognized instantly. He was the health network's elite, ruthlessly aggressive corporate defense attorney. Vincent stepped into the room and his cold gaze swept over the scene. He took in my battered body, the blinking monitors, and the two towering figures of my parents hovering over my bed. His jaw tightened in disgust. He pointed a sharp finger directly at Donovan and Barbara. "Step away from my director right now," Vincent ordered, his voice vibrating with absolute authority that demanded immediate compliance. Donovan blinked, clearly thrown off balance by the sudden intrusion into his manufactured reality. He puffed out his chest instinctively, falling back on the aggressive posturing that had successfully bullied boardrooms and family members for decades. "Excuse me, but this is a private family medical emergency," Donovan boomed, taking a heavy step toward Vincent to assert his patriarchal dominance. "I do not know who you think you are barging into this trauma bay, but my name is Donovan, and you need to turn around and leave before I have you thrown out." The man with the black leather briefcase stepped smoothly in front of Vincent, neatly intercepting my father. He did not raise his voice, but the sheer intensity of his cold, professional stare made Donovan halt in his tracks. "My name is Arthur Vance," he stated calmly, smoothing the lapel of his tailored suit. "I am the lead corporate defense counsel for the National Health Network that employs your daughter. And as of 20 minutes ago, I am also her acting personal legal representation. You are currently trespassing in a restricted medical facility, interfering with patient care, and actively harassing my client. You will step away from her bed immediately, or I will have hospital security physically remove you from the premises, and I will personally file charges for criminal trespass against you both." Donovan opened his mouth to launch another threat, but the words died rapidly in his throat. He looked at Arthur's immaculate suit, the expensive briefcase, and the absolute lack of hesitation in his eyes. For the first time in my entire life, I watched my father back down. He took a slow, reluctant step away from the bed, dragging a bewildered Barbara with him. Arthur did not spare them another glance once they retreated. He turned his attention entirely to me, setting his briefcase on the small rolling tray table at the foot of my bed. The brass latches clicked open with a sharp, satisfying snap that echoed in the quiet room. He reached inside and extracted a sleek silver tablet. "Kira, I was notified the moment the automated trauma alert triggered in our employee system," Arthur said, his voice softening into a tone of deep professional respect. "Vincent and I immediately recognized that the specific location of your injury presented a severe conflict of interest. We are well aware that the general manager of that country club is a close personal friend of your father. We also know that security footage in these types of exclusive private establishments has a highly convenient habit of mysteriously disappearing or becoming irreparably corrupted when prominent members are involved in questionable incidents." I nodded, wincing slightly as the subtle movement pulled painfully at my fractured collarbone. That was exactly what I had feared when they brought me in. Donovan and his golf buddy would have scrubbed the servers clean before the local police even thought to ask for a formal warrant. Arthur tapped the screen of the tablet, waking it up with a bright glow. Anticipating that exact scenario, I did not wait for the local police to navigate their tedious bureaucratic red tape. I woke up a federal judge I happened to know quite well and secured an emergency ex parte subpoena for the country club's central security servers. I deployed a private digital forensics team directly to the club. They bypassed the manager, entirely went straight to the server room, and mirrored the entire hard drive before your father's friend even knew they were on the premises. We secured the raw, unedited files directly from the source, ensuring no tampering could occur. Barbara let out a sharp, frantic gasp. She grabbed Donovan's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging fiercely into the fabric of his suit jacket. Arthur turned the tablet around so the large, high-definition screen faced my parents directly. He did not say another word as he tapped the play button. The video filled the screen in pristine, crystal-clear 4K resolution. The quality was flawless, capturing every shadow and architectural detail of the country club's grand marble staircase. There was no static, no grainy distortion to hide behind. It was exactly like looking through a spotless window. The silent footage showed me standing near the top of the landing, my back turned completely to the camera as I looked down at my phone. Then Chelsea stepped into the frame. The audio was muted, but her physical body language screamed volumes into the quiet hospital room. The video captured her looking over her left shoulder, then her right, carefully scanning the upper hallway to ensure there were absolutely no witnesses around. Her face was twisted into a vicious, ugly sneer, completely devoid of the terrified, fragile victim persona she was currently broadcasting to the world on social media. She took 2 quick, silent steps toward my exposed back. She did not hesitate. She did not stumble. She planted both of her hands firmly between my shoulder blades, leaned her entire body weight forward, and shoved me with a violent, explosive force. The high-definition footage captured the exact horrific moment my heels left the marble. It showed the violent, unnatural twist of my body as I tried in vain to reach out and grab the brass railing. It showed the brutal, sickening impact as my shoulder crashed against the hard stone edge of the steps, and it showed Chelsea standing motionless at the top of the landing watching me fall. She did not reach out her hand to help. She did not look horrified by the outcome. She simply stood there with a cold, satisfied expression, waiting until I hit the bottom floor before she began her theatrical performance of screaming for help. The silence in the trauma bay was absolute. The tablet screen went black, casting a dark reflection of my parents' pale, horrified faces. Their golden child's elaborate lie was instantly obliterated by undeniable digital truth. Vincent stepped forward slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. His voice was smooth and utterly devoid of mercy. "That footage was handed over to the district attorney 10 minutes ago," Vincent stated, looking directly at my father. Your younger daughter is soliciting donations under fraudulent pretenses while actively obstructing an investigation into a felony assault. Arthur pressed a button on his smartwatch, and within seconds, the heavy doors swung open again. 3 large hospital security guards stepped inside, their expressions stern and uncompromising. "Gentlemen," Arthur said, gesturing toward my parents. "These 2 individuals are no longer permitted on the premises. Escort them out immediately." Donovan looked completely broken. The arrogant titan of industry was replaced by a panicked, desperate man watching his empire crumble. Barbara wept openly, clinging to his arm as the security guard stepped forward and firmly instructed them to leave. Donovan let the guards steer him toward the door, his shoulders slumped in deep defeat. But crossing the threshold, his dark eyes locked onto my laptop bag. I saw the exact moment a deeply desperate and truly malicious idea suddenly sparked behind his cold eyes. 3 days passed before the doctors cleared me for discharge. Vincent arranged a private transport to bring me directly to my home. My sanctuary was a sprawling, luxury penthouse condo overlooking Lake Michigan. It was a property my parents had no idea I owned. They still believed I lived in a cramped, damp studio apartment. The floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the living room in warm sunlight. I sat on my velvet sofa, letting the silence wash over me. My shattered collarbone ached with a deep, throbbing rhythm. I closed my eyes, feeling safe. That peace shattered violently before sunset. There was no polite chime from the concierge. Instead, a heavy pounding rattled my solid oak door. I carefully pushed myself up, gripping my good arm against my side. I walked slowly toward the foyer, checking the digital security monitor. My stomach dropped. Donovan and Barbara were standing in my private hallway. My father was glaring directly into the camera lens. I took a steadying breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled open the door. Donovan did not wait for an invitation. He slammed his shoulder against the heavy wood, forcing the door wide open. I stumbled backward, crying out in pain as the sudden movement tore through my broken collarbone. My father marched inside, ignoring my cry. Barbara followed, pulling the door shut with a sharp click. They stopped in the center of the living room, looking around at the vaulted ceilings. The illusion of her struggling daughter was crumbling. But Donovan did not care about the view. He was a man cornered by his own hubris. He marched directly over to my massive marble kitchen island. He reached into the dark leather briefcase he had brought to the hospital. He pulled out a thick manila folder and slammed it down onto the polished stone counter with a deafening crack. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the sharp throbbing in my shoulder. I stood near the edge of the living room. "This," Donovan growled, tapping his index finger against the folder, "is the end of your career, Kira. It is the end of your luxury condo and your smug little attitude." He aggressively flipped it open, spreading printed spreadsheets and internal corporate ledgers across my kitchen counter. They bore the official letterhead of his company. "Do you remember when you were in college, Kira?" he asked, his voice dropping into a menacing register. "Do you remember working in my accounting department?" I stared at the papers. I remembered those miserable summers perfectly. I had worked 60-hour weeks inputting endless rows of monotonous financial data, while Chelsea spent her summers lounging on yachts. "I see you remember," Donovan continued, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "Well, according to these internal audits, you were not just doing data entry. According to these incredibly thorough financial records, you systematically embezzled over $150,000 from my company over the course of 3 years. You funneled the cash through dummy vendor accounts to pay for your living expenses." Barbara stepped forward, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes gleamed with toxic satisfaction. "We were so heartbroken when the auditors brought this to our attention. Kira," she said, her voice dripping with fake maternal sorrow. "We simply could not believe our own daughter was a common thief. But the numbers do not lie. We have your signature on the authorization forms. It is a tragedy, really." I looked down at the documents spread across my kitchen island. It was a complete fabrication. My father had taken my old signature, logged into his own company servers, and generated a mountain of fake financial evidence to frame me for grand larceny. He had weaponized his access to build a fraudulent criminal case against his own daughter. If you do not drop the assault charges against your sister, Donovan threatened, stepping closer to me. I am taking this entire dossier straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I will hand deliver it to the White Collar Crime Division. How long do you think you will keep your prestigious title as a Director of Fraud Investigation when you are facing a federal indictment for corporate embezzlement? You will lose your career and go to federal prison. Barbara nodded, stepping up right beside him. And you are going to go on social media, Kira. You are going to record a live video apologizing to Chelsea. You will tell everyone that you were confused from the head trauma and that the police completely misunderstood the situation. You will clear her name. If you do that, we will quietly bury this terrible secret. I silently stared at the two of them, feeling the cold, hard reality of their malice settle into the quiet room. They thought the threat of losing my career and facing federal charges would break me completely. They needed to see me surrender, so I gave them exactly what they came for. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing inward. I raised my good hand to my face, covering my mouth as if trying to hold back a sob. I forced my breathing to become shallow, letting my eyes dart frantically between the forged papers and my father's face. Please, I whispered, my voice trembling with manufactured terror. Please, Dad, do not do this. You know I did not steal that money. It does not matter what you did, Kira. My father sneered, his voice booming with renewed arrogant authority. It matters what I can prove. Now are you going to do exactly what I tell you to do, or am I calling the authorities right now? I slowly lowered my trembling hand, looking down at the hardwood floor in absolute defeat. I will drop the criminal charges, I choked out, forcing a heavy tear to spill over my eyelashes. I will make the live video. Please just do not ruin my entire career. I cannot lose everything I have carefully built. A dark, triumphant victory washed over Donovan's face. Good, he barked, snatching the folder off the counter and shoving the papers back inside. My legal team is drafting a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. You will meet us at my attorney's office this Friday at noon to sign it. Do not try to run, Kira. We own you. Barbara gave me one last lingering look of pure, utter disgust. Make sure you dress appropriately on Friday, she snapped sharply. You look completely disheveled. They marched quickly out of my apartment, leaving the heavy front door to swing shut behind them. The steel deadbolt clicked into place. The moment the heavy front door shut, my entire posture shifted. The trembling stopped instantly. The fake tears dried on my cheeks. I lowered my hand and stood straight. The terrified, broken daughter vanished completely. My eyes were cold and intensely focused. My father thought he had executed the perfect blackmail scheme. He honestly thought those documents would terrify me into absolute submission. But Donovan had made one catastrophic, unforgivable mistake today. He forgot what I did for a living. I investigate complex corporate fraud, and I have a photographic memory for financial documentation. As he slammed those ledgers onto my island, I was not looking at the forged signatures. I was looking at the top right corner of his printed letterhead. I memorized the 9-digit employer identification number, and I knew exactly how to use it now. The first step was feeding their massive egos. I walked over to the velvet sofa and picked up my phone with my good hand. I needed Donovan and Barbara to believe that their ambush had worked flawlessly. They needed to feel absolute control so they would not look over their shoulders while I began digging. I opened my text messages and navigated to the family group chat. I took a slow breath, channeling the terrified, broken daughter they demanded me to be, and began to type. I begged them not to ruin my life. I typed frantic, fragmented sentences, asking them to please reconsider going to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I promised I would sign whatever non-disclosure agreement their lawyers put in front of me on Friday. I swore I would drop the assault charges against Chelsea and record a public video clearing her name. I sent the messages in rapid succession, making sure they read like the panicked ramblings of a woman who was watching her entire world collapse. The response was immediate and dripping with the exact arrogant satisfaction I was counting on. Donovan replied first with a short, dictatorial command, stating that I was finally learning my place. and that I had better not be late on Friday. Barbara chimed in a few minutes later, adding a heart emoji to a message telling me that this tough love was for my own good, and that family always protects family. Over the next 48 hours, I maintained the illusion of my total defeat. I sent periodic updates to my mother, asking what I should wear to the settlement meeting and questioning what I should say in my apology video. I made myself sound small, manageable, and thoroughly broken. Their confidence swelled to massive proportions. Chelsea even broke her silence, sending me a smug text message saying she was glad I had finally realized I could never win against her. She began posting vague, triumphant updates on her social media, talking about how the truth always prevails and how grateful she was for her powerful protective family. They were all lulled into a state of supreme arrogant safety. While they celebrated their manufactured victory, I was already sitting at the custom-built workstation in my home office. The room was tucked away in the back of my luxury condo, soundproofed and equipped with technology that far exceeded anything my parents could ever comprehend. I pressed a button, and the heavy blackout blinds slid down over the windows, plunging the room into cool shadows. The only light came from the glow of my massive, dual-curved monitors. I booted up my encrypted system, the heavy processors humming quietly beneath the sleek glass desk. Donovan thought he was dealing with a frightened college student who used to input his meaningless data entry. He fundamentally misunderstood my reality. As a top-tier medical fraud investigator, I spent my days hunting down sophisticated criminal syndicates, tracking phantom money through complex international healthcare systems. I tracked millions of stolen dollars for a living. I had legal authorized access to the most sophisticated public record databases, tax filing histories, and corporate shell company trackers available to financial forensic specialists. I did not need to hack into his private servers. I just needed to know exactly where to look in the public domain. I opened my primary tracking software and stared at the blinking cursor in the search bar. I typed in the 9-digit employer identification number I had memorized from the top right corner of Donovan's fake dossier. I hit the enter key and let the vast interconnected databases do their work. The initial results flooded my left monitor. I pulled the public financial filings for Donovan's entire manufacturing company. I did not stop at the current fiscal year. I set the parameters to pull every available document from the last 10 years. I downloaded the corporate tax returns, the registered vendor lists, the state and corporation documents, and the public payroll accounts. I methodically imported all of the raw data into my secure forensic analysis software. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, ignoring the dull ache in my fractured collarbone as I watched the progress bars fill the screen. I was building a comprehensive digital map of my father's entire financial existence. My software began to categorize the information, sorting thousands of pages of dense financial reporting into a clear visual timeline. I started cross-referencing the addresses of his registered vendors against state property records. I ran the names of his listed corporate officers through background check databases, looking for alias identities. I carefully compared the total gross revenue he claimed on his public corporate filings against the actual tax documents submitted to the State Revenue Board each year. Hour after hour, I sat in the cool, dark room, letting the rhythm of the data guide my investigation. I barely stopped to eat or sleep. The meticulous process of financial forensics requires absolute, unwavering focus. You have to systematically look for the hidden anomalies and the tiny financial inconsistencies that simply do not make any logical business sense. A vendor address that traces back to an empty dirt lot in Delaware. A consulting firm that receives massive monthly payouts but has no digital footprint and absolutely no registered employees. A sudden unexplained spike in heavy equipment expenditures during a quiet financial quarter, when the specific manufacturing plants reported a massive drop in their actual production output. I finally instructed the complex software to perfectly visualize the money flow. I desperately needed to see exactly how the cash moved through his sprawling corporate empire. The program processed the complex command, and my dual monitors suddenly lit up with a massive, intricate web of glowing nodes and intersecting lines. Each distinct node represented a bank account, a vendor, or a corporate entity. Each line represented a verified transfer of funds. I leaned forward, resting my good arm on the cool glass desk, my eyes scanning the digital map. At first glance, it looked like a highly successful, legitimate corporate network. But as I applied specific forensic filters to highlight the unverified vendors and the offshore holding companies, the map began to change dramatically. The bright green lines of legitimate business transactions were quickly overshadowed by thick, pulsing red lines of unverified, suspicious cash flow. I isolated the specific vendor accounts Donovan had used to frame me in his fake dossier. I traced those accounts backward to their origin points, bypassing the shell companies designed to hide the true source. A glaring, impossible discrepancy emerged on the screen right before my eyes. The red lines multiplied, branching out like a toxic virus, infecting every single level of his manufacturing company. The numbers did not just look bad, they were completely fabricated. Whole manufacturing departments were listed on the payroll that did not actually exist. Millions of dollars in raw material costs were being paid out to shell companies registered under Barbara's maiden name. I stared at the glowing red web on my monitors, my breath catching in my throat. Donovan had not just forged a few documents to blackmail his daughter. His entire corporate empire was a massive, ongoing, fraudulent house of cards. And looking at the sheer volume of the fabricated numbers flashing rapidly across my dual screens, I realized the ultimate terrifying truth. Tens of millions of dollars were completely missing, and I was going to find every single cent. Using the 9-digit employer identification number I had memorized from Donovan's fake dossier, I began to legally pull the massive public financial filings of my father's manufacturing company. I mapped out the registered vendors, the massive payroll accounts, and the corporate tax returns over the last 10 years. The glowing digital clock flipped to 3 in the morning, but I could not pull myself away from the screens. I isolated the primary operating accounts where the company's lifeblood was supposed to flow smoothly. I ran a rigorous comparative analysis against their filed quarterly earnings and the actual verified bank balances from the state treasury. The resulting graph plummeted like a heavy stone thrown from a high cliff. The undeniable truth was staring me right in the face. Donovan's vaunted manufacturing company was completely dead. It had been functionally bankrupt for over 5 long years. The massive assembly plants he boasted about were empty husks bleeding capital. The supply chain invoices were entirely fabricated from thin air by a desperate man. The payroll accounts were stuffed with ghost employees whose salaries were being routed into dummy corporate accounts. The business was a hollow, rotting shell, producing absolutely nothing but insurmountable debt. I sat back in the quiet darkness, the cool blue light casting long shadows across the walls. I thought about the sheer, unbridled arrogance my parents had displayed, demanding my submission while actively living a massive lie. Every single aspect of their lavish elite lifestyle was built entirely on phantom money. The exclusive country club memberships, the expensive bespoke suits Donovan wore like armor, Barbara's glittering imported diamonds, and Chelsea's endless stream of designer wardrobes and luxury cars. All of it was funded by an aggressive, unsustainable house of cards. They were drowning in corporate fraud, actively cannibalizing a dead company just to keep up spectacular appearances for their high society friends. It explained the absolute raw panic in my father's voice when he threatened me. It explained why they were so fiercely protective of Chelsea's ridiculous charity campaigns. They were completely broke. Their entire social standing was a meticulously maintained illusion, carefully propped up by stolen funds. They were willing to sacrifice my freedom just to keep their fraudulent empire from crashing down into dust. But the more I stared at the devastating financial reality mapped out on my screens, the more a persistent, deeply unsettling question began to bother me. The math still did not make any logical sense. If the manufacturing company had been hemorrhaging cash at this catastrophic rate for half a decade, Donovan should have faced massive foreclosures years ago. The commercial real estate loans alone would have triggered immediate automatic defaults across every single bank he used. The corporate creditors would have ruthlessly seized the sprawling family estate, the fleet of luxury cars, and the highly valuable country club shares. Someone had to be paying those massive monthly notes to keep the aggressive creditors completely blind to the underlying bankruptcy. I leaned forward, my fingers flying rapidly across the keyboard. I needed to dig deeper and find the artificial life support mechanism keeping this dead company afloat. I stripped away the complex layers of fabricated vendor payouts, focusing entirely on the inbound cash flow. I set the sophisticated forensic software to filter out all the fake revenue streams and isolate the actual verified deposits entering Donovan's primary holding company. The software processed the massive data set, humming quietly as it chewed through thousands of encrypted transactions. Suddenly, a clear, consistent pattern emerged from the chaotic digital noise. On the first Tuesday of every single month for the past 5 years, a massive wire transfer dropped directly into Donovan's holding account. It was a staggering amount of liquid cash, perfectly calculated to cover the corporate loan minimums, the hefty mortgage on the family estate, and Chelsea's exorbitant bills. It was a flawless financial lifeline, keeping the bankruptcy entirely hidden from the world. I highlighted the recurring deposit, my pulse quickening. This was the missing link. I slowly clicked on the most recent massive wire transfer. I needed to trace the specific routing number back to its exact origin point. The transaction details were heavily obfuscated, wrapped tightly in layers of deliberate financial privacy shielding. Donovan had tried to bury the source routing the money through 2 different international intermediary banks before it hit his domestic account. But intermediary banks still have to log the initial sender identification codes for strict federal compliance. I isolated the original digital signature attached to the very first wire transfer in the complicated chain. I cross-referenced the routing number against the Federal Registry of Financial Institutions. The search bar loaded for a fraction of a second before the final results populated on my right monitor. The routing number did not belong to a standard commercial bank or a corporate lending group. It traced directly back to a highly restricted private wealth management firm, headquartered in Boston. It was an exclusive institution that only handled elite generational trust funds and massive private family estates. I stared at the name of the firm, a sudden cold chill washing over my entire body. I absolutely knew this firm. I had seen their distinctive, heavy watermarked envelopes sitting on the oak desk in my childhood home. My heart pounded fiercely against my ribs as a terrible, dark suspicion began to take root in my mind. I pulled up the public registration data for the specific trust account attached to the monthly wire transfers. The security protocols were intense, but the foundational formation documents were a matter of public record. I typed in the unique account verification code and pressed enter with a shaking finger. The screen flashed, bringing up the original notarized trust establishment forms that had been signed decades ago. I slowly read the exact name printed in bold black ink at the very top of the page. It was an account established and fully funded by my late grandfather. I stared at the name, the bold letters swimming slightly before my eyes, as the heavy implication washed over me. My grandfather had been a relentless man who built his fortune with his own 2 hands. He never trusted Donovan's flashy business strategies, frequently calling him a man who built castles on quicksand. Yet here was a trust account holding an initial deposit of $2.5 million, established just months before my grandfather passed away. My heart hammered against my fractured collarbone as I scrolled down the digitized pages of the original trust charter. The sole exclusive beneficiary of the fortune was Chelsea. I leaned back in my chair, staring blindly at the monitor. Even from the grave, my grandfather had played favorites, ensuring the golden child would be set for life while completely ignoring his other granddaughter. A familiar hollow ache flared up inside me, but the emotional sting evaporated, replaced immediately by the cold mathematics flashing across my secondary screen. I turned my attention back to the withdrawal ledger. The trust was designed to mature when Chelsea turned 30, a watertight legal fortress to protect the principal. Donovan had breached it, I pulled up the authorization forms attached to the monthly wire transfers. Donovan had completely obliterated the strict security measures. Acting as the financial executor of the estate, he utilized corporate loopholes and fabricated emergency hardship exemptions to systematically crack the trust open. Over the past 5 years, he and my mother had been siphoning massive amounts of cash from the account every single month. They were stealing it directly from their beloved golden child. The $2.5 million had been completely drained down to the very last cent. The final balance glared back in bright, unforgiving red. 0. I rested my good hand against my forehead as the puzzle pieces snapped together with brutal clarity. The desperate ambush in my apartment, the forged corporate dossier accusing me of embezzlement, the unhinged threats of federal prison. None of it was actually about saving Chelsea from a felony assault charge. It was never about protecting their golden child from the consequences of shoving me down a marble staircase. That was just a frantic distraction. Donovan was terrified of the legal discovery process. If Chelsea went to trial, or if she continued publicly soliciting $50,000 in fraudulent donations, the authorities would inevitably start looking into her finances. A curious prosecutor would eventually request her financial records to determine her ability to pay massive court restitution. The moment a forensic accountant glanced at Chelsea's tax profile, they would see the trust. They would see the missing $2.5 million. They would follow the monthly wire transfers straight into Donovan's holding company and expose his bankrupt, fraudulent manufacturing empire. Donovan was not trying to keep Chelsea out of jail. He was trying to keep himself out of federal prison. He needed me to drop the charges and silence the investigation immediately before the police started pulling the same financial threads I was currently looking at. He was perfectly willing to frame me for corporate embezzlement and destroy my spotless career in fraud investigation just to cover up his own massive theft. A resonant calm washed over me, erasing the lingering pain in my shattered collarbone and the exhaustion in my bones. I was no longer the frightened, overlooked daughter desperate for a scrap of validation. I was a top-tier investigator, armed with an apocalyptic financial weapon, and the people who abused me my entire life had just handed me the detonator. I opened a new folder on my encrypted hard drive and began downloading every document. I saved the original trust charter, the authorized signature cards, the falsified hardship exemptions, and the complete devastating ledger showing the systematic draining of the account. I compiled the evidence into a single, undeniable digital portfolio, making sure every digital fingerprint and routing number was perfectly preserved. I sent the encrypted file to a secure off-site backup server, ensuring that even if Donovan somehow gained access to my condo, the evidence would remain untouched. I routed a copy directly to my secure work terminal. The proof was ironclad. Donovan had backed himself into an inescapable corner, trapping himself in his own web of desperate lies. I closed the financial software, watching the glowing red map of his fraudulent empire fade from my dual monitors replaced by my private email client. It was time to end this. I opened a blank message and carefully selected my recipients. I typed in my father's corporate email address, followed by my mother's personal account. I added Chelsea, knowing her phone would ping immediately with the notification. But the most crucial recipient was the fourth name I entered. During my deep dive into the trust documents, I noted the name of the independent legal executor assigned to oversee my grandfather's estate. He was a senior partner at a ruthlessly ethical Boston law firm. He needed to be present to witness exactly what the financial executor had done to the trust he was legally bound to protect. I moved to the subject line, keeping my fingers steady. I kept the wording deliberately vague, but carrying enough formal authority to ensure every single person on the list would show up. Final resolution regarding family assets and pending criminal charges. I moved to the email body, adopting the cold, uncompromising tone of a corporate investigator summoning suspects to a deposition. I did not mention the trust fund. I did not mention the fake embezzlement dossier. I stated that new, undeniable financial evidence had come to light regarding the current legal situation. I informed them that I would not be attending any secret meetings at Donovan's attorney's office. Instead, I demanded their presence at a location where I held absolute authority. I instructed them to arrive at the National Health Network's primary corporate headquarters this coming Friday at exactly noon. I specifically named Vincent's executive boardroom on the top floor as the meeting place. I noted that my personal legal counsel, Arthur Vance, would be present. I added that their failure to attend would result in the immediate release of all financial findings to the authorities. I read over the short, cryptic message one final time. It was perfect. It offered no details they could use to prepare a defense, yet promised absolute destruction if they ignored it. Donovan would assume I was bluffing, trying to negotiate my way out of his fake embezzlement charges. Chelsea would assume I was finally surrendering to her public pressure. Neither of them had any idea that they were walking directly into a meticulously prepared slaughter. I took a slow, deep breath, and I firmly pressed send. The days until Friday moved slowly. I spent hours ensuring my digital traps were flawless. When Friday morning broke, I woke with a profound sense of icy calm. I stood analyzing my reflection in the mirror. I needed to project absolute authority, no more trembling shoulders. I pulled out a charcoal gray blazer. I had taken it to a seamstress to have the left sleeve split and tailored with hidden magnetic fasteners. It allowed me to slide the garment over my bulky medical cast and sling without looking disheveled. I secured the altered sleeve around my fractured collarbone, smoothing out the lapels. I paired the blazer with matching trousers and sensible black flats. I pulled my dark hair back into a tight bun, securing every stray strand until my face was framed by sharp, unforgiving lines. The terrified, broken daughter they had ambushed in my condo was gone. Staring back at me was a seasoned fraud investigator preparing to close the most consequential case of her career. Vincent had arranged for a private car to collect me. I sat in the back seat watching the city streets blur past the windows until we pulled up to the towering glass and steel monolith housing the National Health Network's primary headquarters. The building was an architectural fortress of legitimate wealth and corporate power, a stark contrast to Donovan's bankrupt illusions. I bypassed the crowded reception desk and was escorted directly to a keycard-secured executive elevator. It shot up to the highest floor. The silver doors slid open, revealing a hushed reception area with dizzying views of the sprawling skyline. Vincent was waiting inside the primary executive boardroom. The room was breathtaking, featuring a massive mahogany table stretching 20 feet long. It was surrounded on three sides by floor-to-ceiling glass walls that bathed the space in cold, bright sunlight. Standing beside Vincent at the table was Arthur Vance. He was a veteran corporate attorney known throughout the city for his ruthless destruction of white-collar criminals. He wore a pristine dark suit and possessed a sharp, calculating gaze that missed absolutely nothing. I walked into the room, offered a brief nod, and synced my encrypted tablet to the boardroom's secure presentation screen. Arthur adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and tapped a thick index finger against a stack of physical files resting on the table. They were the printed ledgers of my grandfather's drained trust account. He looked up, his expression grim. He confirmed his office had securely transmitted the unredacted digital file directly to the district attorney at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. The chief prosecutor of the White-Collar Crimes Division had been fully briefed on the new evidence. They were already reviewing the documentation, proving multiple counts of wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny. Vincent crossed his arms, leaning back against the glass wall to add the final crucial detail. He had spent the previous evening coordinating closely with the local police precinct's financial crimes unit. There were currently 4 plainclothes officers stationed in unmarked vehicles just outside the building's underground loading dock. Another pair of detectives was waiting discreetly in the main ground floor lobby. They had the building surrounded. They were holding their positions, waiting for a prearranged text message signal from Arthur to move upstairs and secure the exits. We went over the sequence of events one final time, anticipating every possible reaction or excuse my parents might attempt to use. Every legal trap had been set with surgical precision. Every possible exit route was permanently sealed. We were merely waiting for the prey to walk into the cage. At 5 minutes to noon, my tablet emitted a soft chime. It was an automated notification from the ground floor security desk. Donovan, Barbara, and Chelsea had just cleared the main lobby checkpoint and were granted visitor access badges. I tapped a sequence of commands on my screen, pulling up the building's internal security camera feeds onto my secondary monitor. I watched the high-definition video as the three of them stepped into the private executive elevator for the long ride up to our floor. Even through the silent feed, they radiated an entirely unearned arrogance. Donovan was wearing a tailored navy blue suit. His chest was puffed out and his chin was tilted up in a pose of absolute superiority. He acted as if he already owned the corporate building he was standing in. Barbara stood close beside him, clutching an expensive designer handbag that I knew was purchased entirely with stolen trust fund money. Chelsea was the one who truly made my stomach turn into knots. She was ignoring her parents standing near the back of the elevator, holding her smartphone up high in front of her face. She was constantly adjusting her perfectly styled hair, shifting her angles to catch the best overhead lighting, and speaking animatedly to her front-facing camera. I could not hear the audio through the silent security feed, but her exaggerated pout, her performative sad expressions, and her overly dramatic hand gestures painted a clear picture. She was actively recording an update for her manufactured healing journey vlog. She was undoubtedly telling her loyal online followers how incredibly brave she was for facing her troubled, confused sister today. She was meticulously playing the ultimate gracious victim right up to the very last possible second, milking the fake assault narrative for every ounce of social media sympathy she could gather. I watched her lower the phone with a satisfied smirk and slip it into her purse as the elevator numbers climbed toward the executive suite. The elevator doors chimed loudly out in the reception area, the sound carrying easily through the quiet halls. I reached down and turned off the security camera feed, leaving my secondary monitor dark. I sat perfectly straight in the heavy leather chair at the far head of the mahogany table. Vincent took the chair to my left, leaning forward slightly, and Arthur took the chair to my right, folding his hands on top of the evidence files. Our faces were impassive, wiped clean of any emotion, projecting nothing but a unified front of cold corporate indifference. We waited in the heavy, expectant silence of the sunlit room. The double doors of the boardroom suddenly swung wide open. Donovan marched inside without bothering to knock or wait for an invitation. Barbara and Chelsea followed close behind him, their high heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. Donovan completely ignored Vincent and Arthur, sweeping his eyes over them as if they were beneath his notice. He walked directly toward my end of the table, carrying the exact same dark leather briefcase he had brought to my condo earlier in the week. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at me with an expression of supreme dictatorial triumph. He unlatched the briefcase with a sharp, echoing click and pulled out a thick stack of freshly printed non-disclosure agreements. He arrogantly tossed the packet onto the polished mahogany table, sending it sliding across the smooth surface until it stopped directly in front of my resting hands. He then reached into the breast pocket of his tailored jacket, pulled out an expensive silver fountain pen, and tossed it casually right on top of the legal papers. "Sign it right now and we can all move on," he demanded, his harsh voice echoing off the glass walls. I did not touch the pen. I just smiled. Donovan interpreted my silence exactly as I knew he would. He viewed my stillness as a desperate attempt to maintain dignity in front of my corporate colleagues. He let out a booming laugh that shattered the quiet atmosphere and began to pace the massive mahogany table. His polished shoes struck the floor in a steady, authoritative rhythm. He paused to button his tailored suit jacket, projecting the image of a benevolent king holding court over a disobedient subject. He was in his element, soaking in the power dynamic he believed he controlled. "You should be thanking me, Kira," he began, his voice carrying a resonant theatrical quality meant to intimidate. "This unfortunate ordeal could have been so much worse for you. I could have marched straight into the federal building on Monday morning and handed over those internal audit files to the authorities without a second thought." I could have watched federal agents walk into this building and place you in handcuffs in front of your entire department. But I am your father. I believe in giving people a chance to correct their mistakes. I believe in the fundamental importance of family loyalty and true forgiveness. He paused at the far end of the boardroom, gesturing broadly to emphasize his supposed generosity. He was putting on a spectacular show for an audience of one. He talked about how I had lost my way and forgotten the values this family stood for. He spoke about his own grace and forgiveness as if it were a precious commodity he was generously bestowing upon an ungrateful child. He told me I needed to understand the gravity of my actions and that my embarrassing behavior had caused a massive disruption to our peaceful lives. You should be absolutely grateful we are allowing you to keep your career after what you did, he stated proudly. Barbara stepped forward to stand behind the empty leather chair at the end of the table. She folded her manicured hands tightly, resting them on the dark wood. Her face was set in an expression of deep, manufactured maternal disappointment. Your father is being incredibly merciful today, Kira, she said, her voice dripping with thick condescension. You have caused this family a tremendous amount of emotional stress and public embarrassment over the last few weeks. We have had to endure rumors and malicious whispers at the club, all because you decided to throw a jealous, unhinged tantrum. That non-disclosure agreement sitting in front of you is your only path to redemption. It is the only way we can put this ugly chapter behind us and move forward as a family. Chelsea was practically vibrating with toxic, joyous energy. She was sitting slouched in a plush leather chair across the table, ignoring the severe gravity of a corporate legal setting. She held her smartphone casually in her lap, her arm angled to point the camera directly toward her face. I could see the faint red recording light blinking steadily on her screen. She was actively capturing every moment of my supposed humiliation to post later for her digital audience. She was undoubtedly recording another entry for her insufferable healing journey vlog, playing the brave surviving victim for the camera. When she was not staring lovingly at her own reflection, she was glaring at me with a triumphant, mocking smirk. She reached out and began tapping her long manicured nails against the glass surface of a water pitcher. The rhythmic clicking sound echoed sharply in the room, a deliberate attempt to grate on my nerves and aggressively assert her dominance. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a spoiled child reveling in a victory she had not earned. I remained perfectly still. I did not break eye contact with Donovan as he resumed his aggressive pacing, and I did not flinch when Barbara sighed heavily to express her disgust. I let the silence stretch out, allowing them the necessary time to completely exhaust their fragile egos. I sat back and watched the three of them breathing in the intoxicating fumes of their own manufactured hubris. They were so utterly convinced of their total supremacy that they failed entirely to notice the absolute terrifying stillness of the two men sitting right beside me. Vincent had not moved a single muscle since my family first entered the room. His face was a mask of cold professional detachment. Arthur Vance sat with his hands neatly folded, resting lightly on top of the physical evidence files, his sharp, intelligent eyes tracking Donovan's movements with the clinical, precise interest of a hungry predator watching an oblivious piece of prey. I listened carefully to every spoken word, fully absorbing the sheer, staggering magnitude of their collective delusion. I looked closely at Donovan's imported suit and Barbara's glittering diamond earrings, knowing exactly which stolen trust funds had purchased them. They were lecturing me sternly about basic morality and steadfast family loyalty while actively draining my grandfather's final legacy to fund their pathetic vanity. The sheer breathtaking hypocrisy of the moment washed over me, solidifying my internal resolve into cold, unyielding steel. There would be absolutely no mercy shown today. There would be no quiet legal settlements or gentle private corrections. I was going to systematically tear their entire fraudulent world down to the bedrock foundation. Donovan finally finished his grandiose, exhausting monologue. He stopped moving directly across the wide table from me, planting his hands firmly on the polished mahogany wood and leaning his body forward aggressively. He stared down at me, his eyes hard, cold, and unyielding. "We have wasted more than enough time here today," he declared, his voice dropping into a low, highly menacing register. "Pick up the damn pen, Kira. Sign the document right now and we can all go home and move on with our respective lives. Do not make me ask you to do this again." The boardroom fell completely silent. The only sound was the steady hum of the air conditioning system and the irritating tapping of Chelsea's manicured nails against the glass pitcher. I looked down at the heavy stack of legal papers resting near my hands. I looked at the silver fountain pen Donovan had tossed onto the table. I slowly reached out across the table with my uninjured hand. I did not pick up the silver pen. Instead, I placed my fingertips gently against the edge of the non-disclosure agreement. With a smooth, deliberate motion, I pushed the entire thick stack of papers back across the polished mahogany surface. The packet slid very smoothly, stopping just inches from Donovan's resting hands. "I will not be signing that," I said, my voice perfectly level and calm, echoing sharply in the quiet room. Donovan stiffened his entire body, his eyes widening in absolute genuine shock. The arrogant, self-satisfied smirk instantly vanished from Chelsea's face, and her tapping fingers froze completely mid-air. Barbara let out a sharp, loud gasp of pure indignation. "But I do have a presentation of my own," I continued, holding Donovan's shocked gaze without blinking. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small black remote control. I pressed the top button firmly. Instantly, the heavy automated blackout blinds began to slide smoothly down over the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, plunging the bright executive boardroom into deep, cool darkness. A second later, the massive 85-inch projector screen mounted at the far end of the long table flickered to life. The screen illuminated the darkened room with a brilliant white glow. It cast long, sharp shadows across the faces of my family members. For a split second, the screen displayed a simple loading icon before a high-definition video file began to play. The same raw security footage filled the boardroom screen, only this time, no one could look away. Chelsea's face drained of color as every person in the room watched the undeniable truth unfold again. Her deliberate approach, the violent shove my body crashing down the marble staircase, and her cold smirk before the performance began. By the time the clip ended, her phone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered against the mahogany table. Donovan slammed his fist down onto the table with a deafening crack. He jumped to his feet, his face flushed a dark, angry crimson. He pointed a shaking finger at the massive screen, his chest heaving with manufactured outrage. "That is a complete fabrication," he roared, his booming voice echoing off the glass walls. "You actually expect us to sit here and watch this garbage? You manipulated that footage, Kira. You hired some digital artist to alter the security tape because you are desperate to save your own skin. This is illegal. This is slander. I am calling my legal team right now, and we are going to bury you for this stunt." He reached for his phone inside his suit jacket, but he never got the chance to pull it out. Arthur Vance moved with the smooth, unhurried grace of a man who held all the winning cards. He reached out and picked up a thick manila envelope resting beside his folded hands. Without standing or raising his voice, he tossed the envelope across the table. It slid to a smooth stop right on top of Donovan's stack of blank, non-disclosure agreements. "That is a certified forensic authentication report," Mr. Vance stated, his tone carrying absolute legal authority. The original raw data files were pulled directly from the country club server by an independent third-party cybersecurity firm. They verified the digital signature, the timestamp, and the foundational code of the video file. It has not been altered, spliced, or manipulated in any capacity. Donovan stared down at the heavy envelope, his jaw going slack. The blustering, aggressive energy drained completely out of his posture. He slowly lowered himself back into his chair, his eyes darting frantically between the forensic report and the looping video still playing on the screen. The undeniable weight of the evidence settled heavily over him. He realized in that exact moment that his daughter had committed a highly documented violent felony. The assault charges were completely real, and the evidence was absolutely bulletproof. Barbara broke the heavy silence with a loud theatrical sob. She pressed her manicured hands against her face, her shoulders shaking violently. She squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to look at the massive screen. "Kira, please," she cried, her voice cracking with thick, manufactured despair. "Please turn that awful thing off. I cannot bear to watch it anymore. It is too much. You are tearing this family apart with this vindictiveness. Please just stop it." She was instantly reverting to her most reliable tactic, weaponizing her extreme emotional fragility to avoid any real accountability. She wanted to shift the focus away from Chelsea's violent crime and make me the villain for forcing them to confront the ugly truth. She wailed louder, pulling a tissue from her designer handbag and dabbing frantically at her dry eyes, begging for mercy. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for her, not after the hell she had willingly put me through. I picked up the small remote and pressed the mute button, cutting off the terrible sound of my body hitting the marble steps. The audio vanished, bringing a sharp quiet back to the boardroom, but I did not turn off the projector. I paused the video, leaving the massive high-definition image of Chelsea's malicious smirk completely frozen on the screen. Her cruel, unrepentant face hovered over the room like a dark, looming cloud, forcing them to sit in the inescapable reality of what she had done. I placed the remote down on the table. I leaned forward, resting my uninjured arm on the mahogany wood. "That takes care of the GoFundMe fraud," I stated, my voice radiating absolute certainty. "Chelsea has slandered my name while collecting donations under false pretenses. That constitutes a massive coordinated wire fraud scheme. The district attorney has a copy of that authenticated video, along with every single digital receipt from her fraudulent fundraising campaign. She is facing a significant federal indictment and years in a penitentiary." Chelsea let out a whimpering sound, burying her face in her hands. Donovan stared at me, his eyes wide with panic. "But we are just getting started," I said, holding my father's wide, terrified gaze, letting him realize he had lost. Arthur Vance reached out and picked up a second, much thicker sealed file. He slid it straight down the center of the table, directly toward my father. The heavy binder stopped just inches from my father's shaking hands. He stared down at the dark blue cover, as if a venomous snake were coiled inside, waiting to strike. I opened my own matching binder, flattening the first page with the palm of my uninjured hand. The emotional victim they had terrorized in my apartment was officially gone. I was now a senior fraud investigator, presenting the devastating findings of a fatal corporate audit. "Your manufacturing company went bankrupt 3 years ago, Dad," I stated, my voice echoing off the glass walls with absolute detachment. "You lost your primary distributor, your supply chain collapsed, and your outstanding corporate debts exceeded your projected revenue by a staggering margin of 4-1. Instead of filing for bankruptcy protection like a responsible business owner, you decided to play a desperate illegal shell game." I turned the page in my binder. I watched as Donovan reluctantly opened his own copy, his eyes frantically scanning the highlighted lines of accounting data. I knew exactly what he was looking at. "You set up 3 separate dummy holding companies." I continued reciting the facts I had meticulously memorized over countless sleepless nights. "You used those fraudulent corporations to shuffle imaginary assets back and forth, creating a highly complex paper trail of fake revenue. You then used that fabricated income to aggressively secure massive commercial loans, keeping your dying business artificially afloat, while you and Barbara continued to parade around the country club, playing the role of untouchable generational elites." Donovan opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His face was a sickly gray, the arrogant dictatorial posture completely gone. Barbara was gripping the edge of the heavy mahogany table, her knuckles stark white, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She looked like a woman who had just realized the bridge she was standing on was actually a painted mirage. I slowly turned my gaze away from my parents and locked eyes with my sister. Chelsea was still reeling from the medical revelations and the video of her brutal assault, but she looked up at me, confusion mixing with her raw terror. But keeping a bankrupt company on life support and maintaining an exorbitant luxury lifestyle requires a massive influx of untraceable cash. I said, my voice softening, just a fraction, twisting the psychological knife. Cash that you absolutely did not have, Dad. Cash that you had to steal from someone who implicitly trusted you. I slid a separate, smaller manila folder out of my binder and pushed it down the length of the table. It bypassed Donovan entirely and came to a stop directly in front of Chelsea. She flinched violently, staring at the folder, but refusing to touch it. "Open it, Chelsea," I commanded, letting the silence hang until she obeyed. She hesitated, looking toward her father for any sort of guidance, but Donovan was staring blankly at the table, completely paralyzed by his impending destruction. Chelsea reached out with trembling fingers and slowly flipped the folder open. "When Grandpa passed away, he did not forget about you," I explained, watching her eyes dart across the official bank letterhead. "He actually left you an irrevocable trust fund. He deposited $2.5 million into a high-yield protected account designed to mature on your 30th birthday. He wanted to make absolutely certain that his favorite grandchild was set for life." Chelsea gasped loudly, her eyes widening to impossible proportions as she read the initial deposit amount. A brief, greedy spark of hope flashed across her face, clearly, thinking she was suddenly a millionaire and could somehow buy her way out of this nightmare. I extinguished that pathetic spark immediately. Donovan was named the sole financial executor of that estate. I continued, relentlessly breaking down the digital money trail with cold, devastating precision. He was legally and morally supposed to protect your future. Instead, he systematically raided it. He abused his executor status to completely bypass the bank's strict security protocols. He submitted dozens of fabricated emergency hardship exemptions, forging your signature and blatantly lying to the trust administrators. Over the past 3 years, he and your mother have been quietly siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars out of your account every single month. Chelsea's hands began to shake violently. The thick, expensive cardstock rattled audibly against the mahogany wood. "Look at the final page of the ledger, Chelsea," I instructed, my tone completely devoid of any sympathy. "Look at the current balance." She flipped frantically to the last page of the bank statement. I did not need to see the paper to know exactly what was printed there in stark, unforgiving red ink. $0.00. "They stole your entire inheritance," I said, clearly making sure every word landed with maximum impact. "Every expensive country club gala they threw for you, every imported luxury car they leased, your custom bedroom renovations, your endless stream of designer clothes. They were not spoiling their golden child with their own hard-earned wealth. They were paying for your extravagant present by completely obliterating your future. Your trust fund is entirely gone. Every single penny was dumped straight into Donovan's failing business and your mother's pathetic, desperate vanity." The silence in the boardroom was absolute and deafening. Chelsea stared blindly at the zeros on the page. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into the paper until it crumpled beneath her grip. The devastating reality of the betrayal hit her with the physical force of a tidal wave. The parents who had constantly coddled her, the people she genuinely believed worshipped the ground she walked on, had been quietly robbing her blind for years. "You stole from me," Chelsea whispered, her voice cracking with raw disbelief. She looked up from the folder, her face suddenly contorting into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. "You stole my money!" she screamed, the sound tearing through the quiet corporate room like a blaring siren. She lunged forward blindly, grabbing the heavy glass water pitcher from the center of the table and hurling it directly at her father. The pitcher missed Donovan's head by mere inches, shattering against the glass wall behind him in a massive explosion of water and jagged, sharp shards. Barbara shrieked loudly, throwing her arms over her head to protect her face from the flying debris. Chelsea did not stop. She kicked her heavy leather executive chair backward with such violent force that it tipped completely over and crashed loudly onto the hardwood floor. $2.5 million! Chelsea roared, slamming her fists repeatedly onto the mahogany table. "That was my money. You completely ruined my life. You told me we were rich. You told me I was set for life. You pathetic, lying thieves." Donovan jumped out of his chair, desperately trying to placate his completely hysterical daughter. Chelsea, sweetheart, please calm down. I can explain everything. He pleaded, his hands raised in a frantic gesture of surrender. We needed the cash to keep the house, to keep the company running. Your mother was spending an absolute fortune on her social events, and I had to cover the mounting debts. How dare you blame me for this? Barbara shrieked, instantly turning on her husband with venomous speed. Her face was flushed, her carefully maintained elegance completely destroyed. You are the one who ran a highly successful manufacturing empire into the ground. You are the one who took out those massive fraudulent commercial loans. I did not forge any hardship exemptions. This was your brilliant criminal idea, Donovan. You spent $30,000 on a single country club gala while we were actively missing corporate payroll. Donovan yelled back, his veins bulging prominently in his neck. Do not act innocent now, Barbara. You gladly signed the wire transfers when you needed to pay off your exorbitant credit cards. I hate both of you! Chelsea screamed, fresh tears of pure rage streaming down her ruined makeup. She grabbed a stack of the blank non-disclosure agreements and threw them violently into the air, scattering the white pages across the room like morbid confetti. I am going to federal prison because of you. I assaulted Kira to protect you from a fake embezzlement charge, and you were the one stealing my money the whole time. They were viciously tearing each other apart. The Golden family, the untouchable elites of the country club, were completely self-destructing in a storm of shrieking accusations, shattered glass, and exposed greed. I sat perfectly still, watching the glorious, catastrophic implosion unfold. Vincent and Arthur remained seated quietly beside me, silent professional witnesses to the absolute destruction of Donovan's fraudulent empire. Over the chaotic, deafening sounds of my family screaming and cursing at one another, a new distinct sound cut sharply through the room. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom suddenly swung wide open. The frantic arguing stopped instantly, the three of them freezing in their tracks, as they turned in shock toward the entrance. Two uniformed police officers, tipped off by the attorney, stepped inside the room holding handcuffs. The two officers moved into the room with practiced purpose, their expressions completely stony and unreadable. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, sealing the boardroom like a vault. Chelsea took one look at the gleaming silver handcuffs and immediately scrambled backward, her expensive heels slipping on the polished hardwood floor. She pressed her back against the glass wall, shaking her head in frantic denial. Chelsea Watson, one of the officers, stated, his voice deep and commanding, overriding the lingering echoes of my family's explosive argument. You are under arrest for felony aggravated assault and criminal endangerment. Please step away from the wall and place your hands behind your back. Chelsea let out a high-pitched, completely unhinged wail. She looked wildly at Donovan, reaching out toward him with trembling hands. Dad, do something, she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure terror. Tell them they cannot do this to me. Tell them it was an accident. Donovan took a hesitant step forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture, but the second officer immediately stepped into his path. Donovan Watson, the officer said, pulling a second pair of handcuffs from his utility belt. You are also under arrest for multiple counts of felony wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Barbara released a blood-curdling scream, collapsing to her knees on the boardroom floor. She grabbed Donovan's suit jacket, pulling at the expensive fabric, as the officer firmly turned him around and snapped the cold steel cuffs around his wrists. This cannot be happening, Barbara sobbed hysterically, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve. We are good people. We belong to the country club. You cannot treat us like common criminals. The officers ignored her theatrics completely. They secured Chelsea, who was now openly hyperventilating and crying so hard she could barely stand. They recited the Miranda rights in a flat, synchronized rhythm that sounded like a death knell for the Watson family legacy. Donovan stood frozen in the center of the room, his shoulders slumped, his wrists bound behind his back. The absolute reality of his destruction had finally pierced his towering arrogance. He looked down at the handcuffs and then slowly raised his terrified eyes to look across the mahogany table at me. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in shallow, frantic gasps. Kira, please, Donovan begged, his voice stripped of every ounce of pride, reducing him to a desperate, pathetic shell of a man. Kira, you have to help us. You are a billionaire. You have the money to make this go away. Pay the bail. Hire the best defense attorneys in the country. Fix this. We are your family, Kira. Family protects family. You cannot just sit there and watch your father and your sister go to prison. I looked at him with an absolute unwavering calm. The sight of him in handcuffs begging for my money did not bring me joy, but it brought me a profound, deeply satisfying sense of closure. You are absolutely right, Donovan, I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and cold. I do have the money, but I am not going to spend a single dime of it bailing you out of a disaster you created with your own greed. In fact, I am not just leaving you to the criminal justice system. I am dismantling the last remaining pieces of your fake empire. Donovan blinked in confusion, tears of panic pooling in the corners of his eyes. What are you talking about? He stammered, pulling weakly against the metal cuffs. Arthur Vance leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. He placed his hands flat on the table and looked at my father with the clinical detachment of a seasoned executioner. A week ago, my client quietly established a proxy holding corporation, Arthur explained smoothly. We used that proxy to purchase the entirety of your outstanding defaulted corporate debt from your creditors. They were more than happy to sell it off for pennies on the dollar given your imminent bankruptcy. You no longer owe those commercial banks, Donovan. You owe Kira. And she is calling in the debts. I watched the realization hit him. The last shred of color left his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. I am legally liquidating your remaining assets, Dad, I stated, refusing to break eye contact. I am seizing the house, the cars, the country club memberships, and whatever loose capital is left in your accounts. I am using it to pay off the medical trauma your golden child inflicted on me and to secure whatever fractional remnants of Grandpa's estate you have not already squandered. I am taking everything. Donovan's knees buckled slightly. He looked at me as if I were a monster, a stranger he had never met. But we will have nothing, he whispered, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob. We will be completely ruined. I picked up my manila folder and stood from my chair. I looked down at him, feeling completely detached from the man who had spent my entire life making me feel worthless. You told me failures do not belong in this family. I said, my words dropping like ice onto the boardroom floor. Enjoy the consequences of yours. The officers did not wait for his response. They gripped my father and my sister by their arms and marched them forcefully toward the heavy oak doors. 6 months later, the dust from the absolute destruction of the Watson family legacy had completely settled. There was no grand, tearful reconciliation. There were no emotional phone calls or holiday visits. I held my ironclad boundaries firmly in place, completely ignoring the pathetic, desperate letters my mother occasionally mailed to my attorney's office. Chelsea was currently serving a lengthy mandatory sentence in a federal penitentiary, her arrogant smirk permanently erased by the brutal reality of prison life. Donovan and Barbara, publicly disgraced and entirely financially ruined, were forced to relocate to a cramped, run-down, low-income apartment on the desolate outskirts of the city. Stripped of their stolen wealth and shunned by their former elite friends, they were now drowning in a suffocating mountain of legal fees as Donovan awaited his own impending fraud trial. I stood on the expansive wooden deck of my private modern beach house in Rhode Island, the salty ocean breeze gently washing over my face. The heavy medical sling was permanently gone, my collarbone having healed flawlessly, leaving only a faint silver scar as a reminder of the past. Through the sliding glass doors behind me, the warm, inviting sounds of genuine laughter and clinking silverware drifted out into the cool evening air. I was hosting a small, joyful dinner party with my true chosen family. Vincent was currently arguing good-naturedly with Arthur Vance over a bottle of expensive red wine, while my loyal friends gathered around the massive kitchen island, sharing stories and preparing a beautiful meal. I leaned against the sturdy cedar railing and took a slow, deliberate sip of my chilled white wine. I looked out at the spectacular sunset painting the ocean horizon in vibrant shades of gold and deep purple. I breathed in the crisp, clean air, feeling perfectly and absolutely at peace, having ruthlessly cut out the toxic poison from my life, and proudly claimed my own hard-earned success, finally stepping out of the shadows to live entirely for myself on my own absolute, unyielding terms. The most profound takeaway from Kira's journey is that sharing DNA with someone does not obligate you to absorb their toxicity. For too long, society has pushed the narrative that family bonds must remain unbroken, forcing victims of emotional and physical abuse to endlessly forgive those who repeatedly harm them. Kira's story shatters that myth, proving that your first and most important loyalty must always be to your own well-being. We see clearly how the pedestal built for the favored child ultimately becomes a prison. By shielding Chelsea from every consequence and fueling her entitlement, Donovan and Barbara did not protect her. They engineered their own spectacular downfall. Enabling destructive behavior under the guise of parental love and preserving a fake social image is a dangerous game, one that eventually demands a devastating toll. True peace is rarely found in grand, tearful reconciliations with those who have spent a lifetime tearing you down. It is found in the quiet, absolute strength of ironclad boundaries. Kira did not seek revenge out of unhinged malice. She simply stopped protecting her family from the natural consequences of their own calculated crimes. She chose to walk away from a hollow performative life and surround herself with a chosen family built on genuine respect, loyalty, and mutual support. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives only begin when we find the courage to ruthlessly cut away the poison. Have you ever had to draw a difficult line with toxic relatives to protect your own peace and secure your future? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story about claiming your worth and establishing unyielding boundaries resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more empowering stories of survival and triumph.